Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Grzanka. I'm here in Portland, Oregon, part of Kata School Cascadia, which is a collective of Kata practitioners in roughly the Pacific Northwest of North America, so British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon. But we also welcome people from all over the world, just like we have here today. So this is great to see people from so many different places. This is part four in a six-part webinar series. Today's topic is all about target conditions and obstacles. We'll do a brief overview of how we got to this point at the beginning of the presentation. Then we'll do a demonstration of setting the target condition, and then a little explainer, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions after that. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mark.
Hello, everybody, and my name is Mark Rosenthal. Just to orient us, this is really about where are we going next. So where have we come from? A quick overview. So the steps of the improvement kata are for the learner to be taken through understanding the direction or challenge, grasping the current condition, establishing the next target condition, and then iterating experiments against the obstacles toward that target condition. Meanwhile, we have a coach who is ensuring that the learner is staying on track and exhibiting good, solid scientific thinking as the learner goes through these steps. The goal for the whole process is for the learner to embed that thinking pattern in ideally the way they do everything. In our first session, Understand the Direction or Challenge, we were here, and we set up on the storyboard, the upper right-hand corner, on what is going on, what are we trying to get done. The next session we had was grasping the current condition, and that was last time. And we laid out how to do all of this analysis, and we ended up with the center of the storyboard being populated. So today we are working on establishing the next target condition. And the real goal here is how do we get from all of this information and boil that down and to establish that next target condition. And really the target condition is where do we want to go next? That's really what it's about. We're going to do is I've laid out all that information just kind of in one big slide here. What Maria's going to do is walk me, the learner, through getting this information to the target condition that we just kind of established as a given in the last couple of episodes. But really I want to now here is kind of show maybe the thinking pattern behind it. And I just kind of want to say that, we answered some questions about the logic in the last time of the target condition. And it sounded like there was a right answer, and there isn't. Okay, there's a lot of ways to cut this. And so we're going to kind of go through that coaching cycle and maybe kind of show how a coach might get a learner to kind of hone in on that. So Marie, are you set?
I am. I
Sure.
can take a look at your storyboard again. I see you have a challenge to make 700 faucets per day, and that you have all of this information that we talked about last time in your current condition. And we're going to zoom into there. Um, okay, so are you ready for a coaching cycle, Mark?
I am, thank you.
Okay, so Mark, what is your challenge?
So my challenge is to get our daily output within the shift without any overtime is 700 faucets a day, whereas today we are targeting 650 and barely making 600.
Okay, so what are you thinking about for your target condition?
Well, I'm looking at all these cycle time run charts, and I'm thinking that I want to take a look at Debbie, and just like she's got a lot of waiting time there, and just kind of work on that waiting time so that she's not waiting on faucets, so that she doesn't have all these big spikes in here.
Okay, so in looking at Debbie's cycle times, what do you think would be different about her cycle time in the next 2 weeks?
I think that these big spikes here, a lot of them are because if I pull the waiting time out, I have a lot more level. And I think that her cycle would be probably, pretty consistently in that 30-second time.
Around 30 seconds. Okay. What would you be measuring for your process metric?
I would be measuring her cycle time. I'd be looking at her cycle time so that it's not exceeding
Hmm.
it's at the, yeah,
Right,
her
right, right.
cycle
So
time.
then what would be the output metric, the outcome metric?
The total faucets,
Hmm.
yeah.
How many?
Uh, well, I think we'd be getting more.
Okay. And how many are you at today?
We are at today where we are flirting with 600.
Around 600. So more than 600.
Yes.
Okay. If you got her cycle time down to 30 seconds.
Yeah, it was consistently at that lowest repeatable time there.
Okay, great. Why don't we write that down?
Okay.
Exactly. Okay, so
Yeah.
what do you think might be causing her additional wait time or the cycle time to be so spiky?
She's not getting any faucets from upstream. She's literally waiting on the next faucet.
Ah, so what do you think might be causing the waiting on the next faucet?
If I were to look here, okay, so this is Chuck who's passing her the faucets, and
Hmm.
he's spending a lot of time waiting on the next faucet too.
Okay, so we've got waiting and more waiting. What do you think might be causing Chuck to be waiting?
Well, if he's waiting on the next faucet, I'm seeing here that, okay, so Betty's cycle times are actually longer than his are by quite a bit if I look at the lowest repeatable times here. Yeah. And then if I actually go upstream from there and I look at Alice, okay, so Alice is not obviously waiting on anything because she's starting the line, but her lowest repeatable time is actually right at 43 or so.
Aha. Okay. So what do you think now, looking at this data, looking at all of these charts?
Looking like Alice is actually the one who is pacing everybody else because nobody's processing faucets any faster than she is.
Nobody's processing faucets faster than
Well,
she
yeah,
is.
if they're running faster, they're waiting or they got other out of cycle work that's delaying them. But at the end of the line, if I look at her times and I just look at that time and the total output, that actually makes a lot of sense now. If we are making 600-ish a day, that's pretty close to what her times are.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand. So I'm looking at this graph, seeing that blue line far above the solid red line.
Yes. So
And
she's
in the
above
other
tech.
graphs, it seems like the blue line is sometimes under the solid red line
Yeah. And way under.
and way
Yeah.
under if you take out the waiting time. Okay, I see what you're doing here. So what are you thinking now is a target condition?
I'm thinking Alice's cycle time needs to come down. Her lowest repeatable time, actually, all of her cycle time needs to come down to the takt time.
To the takt time. And the takt time is
At
what?
least 40 seconds.
At
It
least
needs to be at
40.
least that good. Yeah.
Okay. Alice, at least 40 seconds for the takt time.
Yeah.
And
So maybe her cycle doesn't exceed 40 seconds would be a good
okay,
place to start.
great. Let's write that down as your target condition.
Okay.
Oh, that's how you write on PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So then what's your outcome metric for your target condition?
So I think we will absolutely get to 600 a day because I got to factor in there's probably some other delays I don't know about.
Okay. Do you think there might be any changes to the operating pattern?
Not right now. I think the basic structure of the work is probably doesn't need to change any radical way.
Okay. So, what obstacles do you think might be in the way of you reaching this target condition?
I know there's a lot of walking, and especially when she walks back, and I know that adds about 3 seconds. So right there, that's certainly an obstacle I need to work on.
Okay. Are there any other obstacles?
I'd be guessing, so I don't know what the other obstacles are right now. I know
Okay,
there's
good.
other time alligators in there, but I'm not sure.
Okay. So what are you thinking as a next step?
I think I need to actually deal with, I don't know where else her time is going.
Okay.
So the step, I think, if that was the obstacle, I think I'm working on her lowest repeatable time. So I think I'm going to do a total time study down, build a standard work combination sheet, just get every step in there. And so that's going to be the next step I take.
Great. And what do you expect?
I expect to learn where her time is actually going.
Great. And how quickly can we see what you've learned?
I shouldn't take a very long for me to do that, so we can talk about this tomorrow.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what went into that. And again, if questions come up, feel free to put them in the chat. What I'm looking at here in a current condition is I've got the process characteristics, right? The description of the process. And that's how things are going. And that's a cause. And the effect is the outcome. So we want to understand a cause and effect relationship between how the process is operating today and the result that we're getting. For a target condition, I want to ask my learner, what changes are we going to make to that operating pattern, to that current pattern of work? And then how will those changes affect the outcome? And that's really the description of a target condition. And when we set a target condition, we want to keep our learner challenged but not overwhelmed. And if you think of, that comfort zone where I'm certain I already know how to do this, and then around that is a little less certainty, which is what we call the learning zone, where I'm not certain, but I know I can figure it out, or I think I can figure it out. And then we've got the fear zone where the certainty comes back. I'm certain there's no way to do this. And we want to keep the target condition in that learner's learning zone. Although I've got to be clear, the boundaries are not so crisp. They're more of a gradient. And if I were to take that circle and unroll it, we can make another point here. So this is the same graph. It's just now on a horizontal plane. And there's where, hey, this is really too easy. They already know how to do it. That's way too hard. And the Goldilocks zone here is somewhere in the yellow. So I've got a target condition, and I want my learner's target condition to be challenging but not overwhelming. The other thing here, though, is as a coach, you got to learn to calibrate a little bit because depending on the experience of the learner, if I have a really experienced learner, I am going to see more green zone. And so I'm going to expect a very experienced, capable learner to stretch a little more than maybe a beginner would. That's part of developing them as people, as a coach, understanding where your learner is and where their development is and calibrating that target condition accordingly. Because the goal is for that learner to feel a sense of accomplishment. Yeah, we did it when they reach that target condition. So
Mm.
that's one thing to really keep in mind.
I want to add a little bit to this learning zone piece. It's difficult to kind of simulate what a real coaching scenario would be like, but I think in our first episodes we had like the entire storyboard already filled out, and we had decided to focus on operator one because we know that the downstream weighting is caused by operator one. One of the things we wanted to demonstrate in this coaching cycle was exactly this phenomenon we're looking at on the slide right now, where the learner first was focused on operator four because their cycle time looked so spiky. So in my mind, that would be in the green zone if I let Mark go ahead and stick with operator four as the target condition. But I poke a little bit more to get him thinking about what might be causing that weighting downstream. And then by him examining the data, he's now realizing that the focus of his target condition should really be on operator one. And so now I've kind of moved him from green a little bit into the yellow. And his next step is really going to be to go examine the process that Alice is carrying out.
Okay. If I were to look at the key elements of a target condition, one of them is we have an achieve by date. In a process like this, that's typically a week or two. Um, as a coach, the achieve by date is one of the levers you can pull to manage that yellow, red, green. Because if your learner is like overwhelmed, I can just say, well, where can you be in a week? Where can you be in
Mhm.
2 weeks? And by pulling the timeline in, typically people are able to see into a shorter term better than they can see into a longer one. So that's something that I usually the coach sets until the learner is pretty good with it. But it's a good lever the coach can pull because that's something that I can manipulate as a coach to help the learner focus. We want to have a process metric, which is what is the learner actually trying to change? We addressed this a little bit in the previous sessions. If you think of the outcome in our example, faucets output per day, before we kick into overtime, that's the dependent variable is not actionable directly. I can't just say, well, we're just going to make more faucets. We have to change something about the process so that we can. So your process metrics are your independent variables. Those are the levers. Those are the things that will be directly affected by changes in the process. In this case, it was Alice's cycle time. So if we change Alice's cycle time, we're hypothesizing that will cause a change in the daily output. And then we have a target operating pattern. So what would look different in the work patterns? A lot of times that's reflected in a block diagram where we are introducing different steps or resequencing steps. In this case, that didn't come up because there's no real changes required. But there's another example floating around out there where a different team was going to carry out a task, but we didn't know what would keep them from being able to do it. Here's an opportunity where our first experiment may just be to try to run to that new operating pattern in order to learn what the obstacles actually are. A company I worked with some time ago did just that. They were moving to one by one flow from huge chaotic batches in their shipping department. And so their mantra was pick one, ship one for an order rather than, picking all the orders at once and trying to process them all for shipping at the end of the day. So they tried like once a week, half a day, running to that operating pattern to learn what got in their way, writing down all the things that got in their way, and then systematically working on those through experiments, and then stood it up and tried it again. So trying to run to that new operating pattern is a very powerful way to find obstacles. And then the obstacles themselves, and I'm going to go into a little bit of background and a little bit about what good obstacles are, and then we can close out the presentation, really is what are the things in the current operating pattern that make it hard to change that process metric or make it hard to operate to the new pattern? What gets in your way? So achieve by date goes on the storyboard right here. There's our process metric, which was Alice's lowest repeatable time. Our outcome metric was faucets per day, And in this case, we weren't changing the operating pattern. And now I want to go a little bit into that obstacle parking lot. So this I love. This is from some years ago. This is a real one. What stands out to you when you look at this piece of paper, right? In just at first impression, it's messy. This represents in some ways the actual learning. So this was a hospital surgery department. They were running scheduled surgeries, and their target condition was to start on time for the first surgery every day. And there was a lot of obstacles in the way of that. And one of them was that the patient's family wanted to come see him. The nurse who's prepping them for surgery had to detach from that process and go escort the visitors back. And that was taking the nurses away. So you can see visitors back and forth was the first pass at the obstacle, but then because that's the one they wanted to work on, I kind of pushed on them a little bit. What's the impact that's having? Well, it takes the nurse's time away from prepping the patient. Okay, that's the real obstacle. But the other thing you can see is that they're scratched out, they're rewritten, they're whited out. This gets updated every cycle, and this is the most dynamic piece of paper in the whole process. One way to think about obstacles is I can't, and then name your target condition. Like I can't get Alice's cycle time below 40 seconds because, and start listing the reasons. That's just a good verbal way to maybe help your learner process through that. So for example, I can't walk 20 minutes every day because if I were looking to lose weight or whatever. And then this, how can you measure that? That's on some forms. I think that ought to say, how do we know we're making progress, or how will we know it's not a problem anymore? And so what's kind of the goal there? So that's just another tool to help your learner think through it. Generally speaking, we would like to see the facts that are happening on the ground and what are the negative consequences against your target condition or your process metric. So we have a cause and effect laid out on that obstacle. One of the warning flags, if it starts with a verb, it's likely an action item. And we don't want action items on here. We just want the problem. The actions are the experiments. Another red flag, if it starts with the word lack of, we're leading with a solution. So what's the problem you're actually trying to solve? And I can ask as a coach, well, if that were put in, then what would be different? And start to back them up into what's the problem we're trying to solve. We need more people complaining about constraints. Nothing you can do about that if that's ground ruled out. So we want to be thinking differently about that. Just calling out waste, too much walking, too much overproduction. What's the impact on your target process? Because there's lots of waste in the faucet line. There's lots of walking, but except in the case of Alice, everybody's lowest repeatable time is already below the planned cycle time. That's not an obstacle yet. So we just got to be thinking about what's the actual effect that's having. And then starting out with how do we asking a question. Yeah, but why? Why is it important to know that? Some of the common things I've seen over the years, lack of standard work. Yeah, okay. But what's the negative consequence on the target condition? Because I've seen really good lines that actually were amazing. They had their standard work was actually pretty weak. So anytime I hear lack of in some lean tool, I want to bore in and understand exactly what you're trying to fix with that. Out of cycle work adds 58 seconds to the cycle times. That's nice. Okay. That tells me that I can just count how often that happens. And when it's not happening anymore, then I know that obstacle is fixed. We don't know why the rework occurs. I've seen that one. Okay. Now what's interesting about that is just get really clear. That's no longer an obstacle when we do know why the rework occurs. It doesn't mean I need to fix it. So we just want to be really clear on what solved looks like. Not enough time. I can't get a time stretcher is not actionable. So I've got to come back around and say, okay, what kind of time are we trying to save and why? Takes too long is just the opposite of that. These are all real things I've seen. That's why they end up on this list. That's a general observation, not actionable. How long does it take? How long should it take? Too much walking, that's calling out waste. What's the negative consequence? So in my example, in Alice's case, yeah, her walk back adds 3 seconds to her lowest repeatable time. All right, that's something I can action, but that's why I would be actioning it. Operator 4 is delayed 27 seconds waiting for the next unit. That's beautiful. Now I kind of know what the obstacle is, but now I need to do is I got to dig in and count how many times that happens and start learning why they're waiting. Implement a U-shaped work cell. Yeah, what's the negative consequence of the current layout? Why is a layout a problem? So lack of training is one of my favorites. Okay, what's the negative consequence? What do you see happening as a result of that? And so the obstacles are what kind of set the path. You follow the obstacle trail. And I think Tracy showed a great slide of a bunch of leaves on a putting green. I don't need to clear all of them. I need to clear enough of them to find a path to where I'm trying to go. So it's very common that the learner won't work on all the obstacles. This was a question Mike was asked, well, what happens if the learner leaves an obstacle off the list that I, as the coach, know is a problem? This was Mike's response, right? The obstacles will find you if you don't find them. So it doesn't have to be perfect. The obstacle list from the perspective of the coach is just information to tell me how the learner's thinking about it right now. And that's all it is. It's not a list of action items, and I don't need to address them all. Don't waste a lot of time debating whether or not it is an obstacle. Just write it down because you don't have to have a tick mark off of all of them. So just because it's on the list doesn't mean you have to address it. As a coach, be prepared that your learner will find a way around an obstacle that you, as the coach, thought was critical. Happens all the time. It also happens all the time that stuff we thought was obstacles turned out not to be, and they just got crossed off the list without having anything run as we learn more about it. Obstacles are tied to the target condition. They are in the way of getting to the target condition, and very often we'll get obstacles that have less to do with the target condition as it is right now and more to do with the challenge, all the stuff we need to fix. And that's another sign of a learner that's a little overwhelmed. So I can ask, how does that obstacle in the way of getting just to the target condition? And what I've done a few times is set up what I call valet parking, which is another parking lot that's just off to the side of the storyboard so that they can see those things are not forgotten, they're written down. So they're still, we understand they're problems. They're just not problems we're working on right now. And then they can get pulled in against subsequent target conditions as appropriate.
So the obstacles, I like how you pointed out on that first slide, they're messy, right? And
Yeah.
they continue. So even though we're talking about obstacles today in terms of the target condition, we're going to continue working with obstacles as we get into experiment. We started talking about them today to give a little context to the target condition, but they'll also be used as we go into experimenting in the next webinar too.
Okay. So just to kind of tie this so far together, if you look from the whole thing, the outcome metric is what ties your current condition back to your challenge, faucets per day in our example. The current condition represents understanding of the normal operating pattern, how the work is done, and understanding what factors, your process metric, influence the outcome. A target condition is typically focused, it's not a rule, but it's a guideline, on one process metric with a prediction of how changing that process metric will affect the outcome. And the obstacles are characteristics in the current process that make it difficult to change the process metric or to run to your target pattern.
We've got a question in the chat
Okay.
from Dennis. Dennis is asking, how do we take the data slash information accumulated and bring in learning versus just observation, in addition to just identifying the next target condition, especially if there were mistakes made in the process or by Mark? It's not clear to me as we focus on the person Alice and not as much on the process.
Okay. So Dennis, feel free to pipe in or whatever here. I just used Alice's name, but I'm looking at her process, just to be clear. But where I want to go is I need to create circumstances that enable Alice to carry out her process in 40 seconds or less. Any changes I make are about removing obstacles that are in her way, but she's busy building faucets. So I'm playing the role here of the team lead. I'm the one who can back off a little bit and see where that time is going. And then in the actual experiments, it's going to be Alice and me working together to adjust her work cycle, try to pull that time out. I, as a learner, am learning how to break down this work. I'm
Mhm.
learning how to analyze it, and I'm learning how to see more than just that we aren't making enough faucets. So the learning is embedded in the experimenting.
Yes, which we'll get into next. But first, we're going to set it all up to have a current condition and a target condition to
Right.
name the gap that we're trying to eliminate or reduce. We've got
So I just
another
want
question.
So one of the things I've experienced in a previous company is that, when we would start katas, with the intent of somebody was actually going to be the learner, that sometimes the shop floor leadership would say, yeah, we're totally in support of it. But then it became clear that they really weren't, and that that person magically wouldn't be able to show up. The kata was slow. They couldn't, they were always busy with something else. What are some of the what are some of the words of encouragement that you give to leadership to explain why this is important to do, why it's important for their people to learn how to become better problem solvers?
That's something we address about every third session on our Friday calls.
Fair
It's
enough.
a very common one.
I don't try to explain why that is important, and I focus on exactly this learning zone model that we're talking about here. I think a lot of times I see leadership kind of pass down a challenge or a target or something that is all the way in the red zone. And then we get upset because we're not able to make progress on that. And we're not breaking it down into smaller steps that are actually allowing people to learn right away. So I'm focused on this and what
Mm.
is the problem we're actually trying to solve and what do we know about it? A lot of times we need to start right there because there are many processes that we do every day that we don't yet understand.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you so much. That's helpful.
Any other questions that have come up?
What do you use or how do you gauge what is too big of a bite of the elephant for your first target condition? People will want to go to their challenge in 2 steps if they don't have any kind of guiding principle about your first target condition.
I'm going to go back to pulling that date in. Where are you going to be in a week? Or where are you going to be in 2 weeks? Because if the challenge is set well and the challenge is, a 6 month, a year kind of thing, it's unlikely you're going to get there in a week. So if I see the learner trying to make that leap all at once, I'm going to pull that time fence in.
Thank you.
On that question of like, how do we know if the target condition is too big? If I'm looking at, like in this example that we've talked through, I can tell by the kind of charts that Mark has produced that he knows how to analyze a process pretty well. So I don't know that I see that kind of detail from most learners to start with. So I'm taking that into consideration. We're kind of showing the example here of like, if you did all of the things, but in real life, I don't know that that happens as often as we want it to.
And so there's a lot of coaching involved in
Yeah.
grasping the current condition.
Yeah. And like, what is my assessment of Mark's level of understanding of the process? And as a teacher, where do I think would serve him best to learn to like up his skill in process analysis and to kind of point him in that direction and see what he comes up with and then give him room to come up with an answer and then we'll talk again and I'll coach you to a next step.
And I think it's also important to understand, especially that first target condition, which this one is, it's really a freebie as long as it isn't dangerous. Let's just say that I had committed to working on operator four's waiting time, it would have become apparent very, very quickly that the obstacles in the way are that she's not getting product. And I would have had to follow that trap line upstream pretty fast. And we would have ended up working in the same space. So there's not a, there's not a right or wrong, especially to the first one. It doesn't matter that much as long as there's some logical link between the target condition and the challenge and where we're actually trying to go. Okay. I just want to close with our Kata School Cascadia a little bit. Every Friday, we have open Q&A and these kinds of discussions. If you want to get the invite for those Friday Zooms, they're at noon Pacific and noon 30 Pacific, but we gear more toward what we call starter kata or beginner kinds of discussions in the first half hour and more coaching stuff in the second half hour. But feel free to join at any time if you want. Plus that will get you on the mailing list so as we record it and send out the recordings Friday afternoon. Then we are heavy now into the planning for our in-person event that we do every July in Mukilteo at Cost Tailored. And if you want to get more information about that, you can zap that QR code there. And that's Monday after lunch through Friday at lunchtime, and it is pure immersive learning, and there is no way not to get involved in the learning process yourself. So I just kind of wanted to lay that out. And I think we are probably at the close unless something else comes up for a question.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Yes, thank you so much.